friends are simps.
Welcome to the first episode of something that I'm going to be calling the All My Friends Are JPEGs video podcast. The idea behind this is to create a kind of companion video series to the various posts that I make over on my world famous photography site, allmyfriendsarejpegs.com. Now today I want to talk a bit about street photography, and specifically I want to talk through some of the challenges or struggles I've had when trying to take photographs on the street in my home city of Glasgow. This is something that I've been kind of stuck on for a long time, and it's been particularly difficult because I feel like photography has been so integral or so central to that, my own identity, in the sense that I was always the person with a camera, always the person who was documenting my entire life, always the person that had the compulsion to do that. And so the fact that I've struggled really hard with being able to take street photos in my own city, which I have a deep love and affection for, it kind of throws a lot of questions up about, my whole identity and ability as a photographer. So that's kind of what I'm going to be unpacking in this. I've already posted a blog kind of talking about this topic in general, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to further exercise the demon by talking about it out loud. Now, I'm going to be sharing some photos of Glasgow street photography stuff throughout, so that's what will be going on in the background if you haven't already figured that out. Most of these, if not all of them, will have been taken with the Ricoh GR Mark III, which is an excellent discrete street photography camera, and at some point I might do a video on that as well. The first thing I should do is give you a kind of explanation of my version of street photography, because to be honest, I think a lot of street photography online is shite, and I'm not excluding myself from that. But what I would say is that there are many people out there who do street photography just for the sake of taking photos on the street. And for some, it seems to be like they just want to get over the fear of taking photos of other people candidly. And so you get a whole host of different pictures of people that might well be very close, but they've captured photos just of people walking past them in the street with kind of strange expressions on their face and things like that. And that doesn't really do anything for me. Similarly, I'm not really all that interested in the kind of obvious cliches or contrasts that you get in a lot of street photography that are trying to ape the old masters in their kind of singular art pieces. For example, I don't really think that a picture of a cow in front of a burger sign is all that clever or interesting. It's been done, right? All of that stuff has been milked. Sorry for the pun. That was not intended at all. It just came out. The point being that my view of street photography is much more a documentary style, in the sense that one of the things I love about street photography is being able to wander about a new place and capture or express some of the atmosphere and the attitude and the character and the things that I find interesting about a place. So the individual images in of themselves aren't quite as important, but more the general picture that is built up across the set. So that's important to get out the way right at the start, so that we know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about street photography. Now, moving on to some of the reasons that I've kind of thought about or considered over the years for, explanations of why I might be scared to take photos in Glasgow, or why I find it much more difficult to take photos in Glasgow, whereas I've got no problem whatsoever in taking pictures anywhere else in the world, like Tokyo, even somewhere like New York or London. Why is Glasgow so different that it just seems to be like my Achilles heel? Now, the first reason that I've kind of landed on is that people in Glasgow are scary. Like, Glasgow is not a place that you want to fuck about with people, because they will not have any problem with asking you what the fuck you think you're playing at if they think you're up to something suspect. Glasgow has a reputation for being a bit rough, a bit hard, and I personally, having lived here for a long time, I grew up being told that Glasgow is a mean city and you need to look out for yourself and all that kind of thing. So perhaps some of that has, deeply kind of sunk into my psyche, where I don't want to have conflict with people in the street, because I've spent my entire life in Glasgow trying to avoid getting involved with other people. And to be honest, that seems like a fairly reasonable fear to have. Now, as I've thought about this, Yes, this may well be a big reason why I'm hesitant to take photos in Glasgow. However, it doesn't make much sense when I start to unpack it. At least it doesn't make sense in terms of explaining away every reason or, the entirety of why I'm nervous about taking photos in Glasgow. First of all, even though I've lived here in Glasgow for a long time and I may well have internalized and be more aware of the dangers in a place like this, I've taken street photos in far more dangerous places than Glasgow, and so it doesn't seem to make sense that I would be overly fearful of my hometown than somewhere like New York or Serbia or, Ukraine or anything else. Secondly, when I think about it rationally, I have worked in nightclubs in Glasgow for such a long time that I know fairly, to a reasonable degree of how to handle myself if somebody begins to, be conflictual. And by that I don't mean that I could take them down with some kind of karate move, because I definitely would get my arse kicked. There's no doubt about that. The point is that I can usually turn around people that are wanting to, who are curious about what you're doing and hostile, because you can say to them, hey, oh, I love the way you look, or I love your shoes. Oh, big man, what you doing? I can engage people fairly readily and easily. That doesn't frighten me. It's a skill that I've had to learn through dealing with many, many hostile drunk people. So really, I shouldn't be afraid of people in the street in that regard, and hopefully I wouldn't be targeting the people who would genuinely kick my head in. So, people are scary, but really, is that a good enough reason? Now, the second kind of reason that I've thought about in terms of why I might be nervous or more apprehensive about taking photos in Glasgow, or why it might be more difficult, I guess I should say, to take photos in Glasgow, is that Glasgow simply is not as busy as other places. Glasgow is a relatively small city. It is the third biggest city in the UK. However, in terms of the way the population is spread out, in terms of the actual city centre and the way it's laid out, there are only a few main streets which actually get quite busy, and those streets are actually quite wide. So it is very difficult to get closer to people, which you kind of need to do in order to have a good street photograph, or at least some kinds of street photographs. Now, I do think that there is something in this. When you're in a place like Tokyo and there are people everywhere and you're literally packed in close to them, people are much less likely to engage with you. It's much easier to get closer to people and take photographs without them noticing, or without, you having to get so close that they know you're there and are curious or kind of hostile about it. However, I don't think that's a great excuse, really. I think that ultimately what I need to do is change the way I take photographs in Glasgow, and this is something that I've kind of realised over the past couple of weeks, even in the sense that if you can't get as close to somebody, then you should use a longer focal length. So whilst the Ricoh GR might be an incredible camera for street photography in places where you can get a bit closer, maybe it's just not good enough for a place like Glasgow where you actually have to drop in a wee bit more in terms of the focal length. And so one of the things I've decided to do is get a different camera for shooting in the street, which is the Ricoh GR Mark III X, and this is a 40mm lens on it as opposed to a 28mm lens, and even just in the short time I've been shooting with it, it's actually made a big difference. So there could be something in this in terms of the busyness level. With that said, I also think that's a bit of an excuse, right? Because even if you can't get that close to people, it's kind of it doesn't really make much sense that I wouldn't be able to get photos of the kind I was talking about earlier. Because Glasgow is hoaching with sights. There is loads of stuff going on everywhere. There is always some kind of act of insanity down a back alley or even out in the open. And actually, part of the reason that I used to love living in the city centre when I was at university, and the thing is, whilst Glasgow may well not be as busy or at least as packed as other places, and whilst yes, that might make it a bit more difficult to get photos or get as close to get photos, I think it can also be a bit of an excuse, which probably or potentially is just there to cover up my own failures, because Glasgow is positively hoaching with sights. Everywhere you look, there is something weird and wonderful going on, and that is part of the reason that I used to love living in the city centre, and I would walk for an hour every day to get to university instead of getting the subway or something like that, because I loved soaking up all of the scenes and being part of the kind of stuff that was going on, whether it was some crazy person in the middle of the road, whether it was people having a dispute, whether it was whatever it might have been, that kind of weirdness is something that Glasgow does fairly well, fairly often, and tends to be everywhere you look. So whether or not the city is busier or not, there is plenty of things to take photos of, and so I can't really use that as an excuse either. At this point, unfortunately, the logical conclusion from all of my kind of thoughts on this would be that my pictures just aren't very good, right? Whether I'm, afraid of getting caught up in a conflict, or whether I'm just overly relying on a particular kind of camera, or whether or not I'm just kind of too used to taking the same kind of photos, maybe I've just not got the touch. Maybe I've kind of lost my touch. Maybe I never had it in the first place. Maybe, I'm just a shite photographer who can't take street photos, and I can only take them in places where it is much easier to do so. Now, I'm not sure that is the answer though, because I do have plenty of evidence in my back catalogue of times and places and trips where I've shot big sets of pictures that I am really happy with, including photos from New York, including photos from Serbia, including Las Vegas, including a whole bunch from Japan. And so, it's kind of like a self-defeatist thing to be like, well, maybe you just can't do this after all. And so that's one particular thing that I kind of need to shake. The problem, of course, is that all of the sets that I've just mentioned are from travelling abroad. These are all from places where I've been in new environments, and I've wanted to soak up the atmosphere and the feeling of those places and kind of reflect back some of what I've experienced. And the trouble is, I'm not entirely sure how you do that when it comes to a place that you've lived for basically your entire life. How are you meant to tell or represent the story of a place that you know so well in a way that remains interesting over multiple different posts or multiple different collections without it just becoming yet another exercise in mundanity? I don't want to just produce the same kind of crap all the time, and I don't know how you're meant to keep things interesting over, a continual narrative rather than a single post, which is often what collections of pictures from abroad are. Perhaps that is the crux of the whole thing though, and maybe I've been looking at this in entirely the wrong way, asking why Glasgow stops me from taking photos that I would like to take, as opposed to thinking about changing my approach and perspective, because I can't really expect to just apply the exact same approach I would when I go to a new place where I'm only there for like a week or something, whether that's technically or philosophically, as I would to my home city where I'm there all the time and I have to continually look at things afresh, and I can't just sum it all up in a single blog post. I think ultimately one of the biggest things that I have to spend a bit more time examining is the question of why I feel compelled to take photos on the street in Glasgow in the first place. Whether it's just because I feel guilty about not taking photos with the various cameras that I've got unless I'm away travelling somewhere, or whether it's just because it's a habit that I've built up over years, or whether ultimately it is genuinely because I find the people and the place worthy of closer inspection and closer kind of attention. Because if that is the case, then surely the rest of all of this doesn't really matter. And perhaps this is something that you can resonate with if you are a photographer struggling to take photos in your home city. Maybe I just simply need to get out there and do it more frequently and shut the fuck up about it. For now, I am back in the swing of trying to take photos around the city. I am going to be spending a bit more time doing it because I have the Ricoh GR3X. Although I do hope that this isn't just a new camera thing where I'm covering up the deeper deficiencies with my photographic skills, but I guess we'll find out. If you're interested in seeing more of these pictures, go look at allmyfriendsarejpegs.com, and thank you for listening to my self-indulgent rambling.